The wedding was a spectacle of shadow and snow. Iron Vein Keep, carved from black stone and crowned with turrets that pierced the winter sky like accusing fingers, had never seen such a gathering. Packs from across the frozen territories had come to witness the union, though everyone there understood the truth beneath the velvet and ceremony. This was not love. This was the price of survival. Alara of the Crescent Pack stood in the great hall, her raven black hair bound with silver thread, her emerald eyes fixed on the stone floor. The charcoal gray wool cloak draped across her shoulders felt heavier than her own fate. She could feel their stares, the Iron Vein lords and ladies, the visiting alphas, the pack warriors, all of them assessing her, judging her, dismissing her. She was not what they expected for their alpha. She was not what anyone wanted. But then again, no one had asked her opinion on that matter. The ceremony took place in the ancient stone chapel that adjoined the keep, a space so cold that the priest's breath came in visible clouds as he chanted the binding words. The chapel was built into the mountain itself, with vaulted ceilings that stretched so high they disappeared into shadow. Massive columns of black stone rose like petrified trees. The floor was laid with gray marble that had been worn smooth by centuries of ceremonies, each groove a record of countless oaths, sworn and bonds sealed. Iron Vein warriors stood along both walls in full ceremonial armor, their wolf emblems gleaming. The pack elders sat in the front rows, their faces weathered and inscrutable. The bitter cold seeping through the stone seemed to settle in Alara's chest, making each breath sharp and painful. Her raven black hair, bound with silver thread meant to symbolize her worth, felt like chains. The white silk gown she wore, a mockery of tradition that called for the Luna to represent purity and strength, seemed designed to make her look fragile, breakable. Her father, pale and dying in the weeks before this day, had told her what to expect. He had explained that this was her sacrifice, her purpose, the weight she would carry so that her pack would survive. But no explanation had truly prepared her for the isolation of standing in that chapel, watching the man she was being bound to look at her with the emotional distance he might reserve for a business contract. The elder priestess spoke the traditional words about unity, about strength joined with strength, about the sacred bond between Alpha and Luna that would endure beyond death itself. But Kale's responses were hollow. His voice carried no resonance, no belief, no hope. Kale Ironvein stood beside her like a statue of dark marble, his stormy gray-blue eyes never meeting hers, his expression carved from stone. He was everything a legend promised, tall, broad-shouldered, powerful, with that scar through his left eyebrow that made him look both beautiful and dangerous. When the elder priestess asked if he would bond with her, he answered with a single word. Yes, not with devotion, not with hope, just yes, like accepting a shipment of supplies, like acknowledging an unpleasant necessity. The priestess turned to present Alara's father's ring to Kale, a band of iron wrought into the shape of a crescent moon, the crescent pack's symbol, a token of her lineage and her value as a bride. When Kale slipped it onto her trembling finger, he did not look at her face. He stared past her, through her, at something infinitely more important than the woman being bound to him for eternity. The weight of that ring felt like she was being branded, marked as a failure before the ceremony had even concluded. The priestess looked at Alara and asked if she consented to this union. Alara's voice, when she managed to force it out, was barely a whisper. I do. What choice did she have? Her pack depended on this binding. Her father depended on it. She opened her mouth and destroyed her own future with 3 words. His mother, a Lady Marin, sat in the front row wearing black velvet and an expression of absolute disappointment. The silver wolf brooch at her throat caught the light as she shook her head slightly. Her ice blue eyes, sharp and cruel. Beside her, a woman with copper red hair, styled in elegant braids, smiled. Seraphine, Kale's intended lover, the one he should have married. The emerald green velvet of her dress seemed to mock Alara's simple linen, and the gold embroidery along Seraphine's necklace caught the firelight like a crown. The feast came next. Alara sat at Kyle's left hand, which was more than she deserved, according to the Iron Vein hierarchy. She barely touched her food. How could she eat when she could feel Seraphine's calculated stare from somewhere in the crowd? How could she eat when Lady Marin's disapproval was almost a physical force pressing against her shoulders? She'd been traded by her dying father like a valuable horse. The Crescent Pack, on the verge of collapse, had bartered her to Iron Vein in exchange for protection. It was supposed to be her noble sacrifice. It was supposed to mean something. The feast itself was magnificent. Roasted venison, honey-glazed pastries, wine from territories so distant they seemed mythical. Musicians played in the corner, their instruments producing haunting melodies that seemed to echo the sorrow Alara felt. She watched Kale drink deeply, watched him laugh with his warriors, watched him ignore her so completely that she began to wonder if she'd imagined the ceremony that had just bound them together for all eternity. Lady Marian made a point of standing and offering a toast, a pointed speech about the honor of the alliance, the strength of the Iron Vein name, and how grateful the Crescent Pack should be for this opportunity. She never looked at Alara once. Seraphine, for her part, positioned herself as close to Kale as propriety would allow, her hand occasionally touching his arm in ways that made clear to everyone present exactly where her intentions lay. The other nobles whispered among themselves, their eyes flickering between Kale's cold distance and Alara's trembling hands. By the end of the feast, Alara had become a cautionary tale, the girl no one wanted, bound to a man who clearly regretted the binding. By the time the midnight bells rang, the feast dissolved into chaos, packs separating by territory, wolves challenging each other in friendly sparring, the celebration of a binding that no one truly believed would hold. Kale stood abruptly. Come, he commanded, and there was no warmth in his voice, no gentleness, just duty calling to be fulfilled. Alara rose, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. This was the moment she'd been dreading since her father had explained her fate. The wedding night, the binding of flesh, the consummation that would lock her to this cold man forever. She followed him up the spiral stone stairs, her boots clicking against ancient rock. The Iron Vein Keep was a maze of shadows and narrow corridors. Braziers burned with strange-smelling wood that cast flickering shadows on tapestries depicting ancient hunts. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Kyle led her not to the Luna's chambers, those grand rooms overlooking the frozen northern grounds, but to a narrow hallway that descended, down, further down, into the depths of the keep, where the air grew colder, where the walls pressed closer together, where the servants slept. He stopped at a small wooden door, opened it to reveal a room barely larger than a closet. A narrow bed, a small chair, a table barely wide enough for a candle. The window was small and high, just at ground level, looking out onto the snowy courtyard where stable hands moved about their work. "This is your chamber," Kyle said, his voice so cold it could have frozen the snow outside. "You will sleep here. You will not enter the Luna's quarters. You will not sit at my table. You will not expect anything from me except..." He paused, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered in those gray-blue eyes, something that might have been regret or might have simply been disgust. "Accept the peace your pack will enjoy under my protection. That is all you are here to secure. You're not a wife, you're a transaction, a tool, an obligation that I have accepted because it was politically necessary. But let there be no confusion about what you are to me. You are nothing. You are less than the servants who walk these halls. At least they were chosen for their usefulness. You were simply foisted upon me by circumstance and your father's desperation. Do not seek my company. Do not expect my affection. Do not ever imagine that what happened in that chapel meant anything beyond a legal formality. You exist now only to serve the Iron Vein name through your pack's loyalty and your silence." The words struck her like a physical blow. Ilara stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak, unable to move. She'd expected rejection, yes. She'd prepared herself for coldness, for indifference, for being second choice while Seraphine held his true affection. But this was a different kind of cruelty. This was public humiliation, wrapped in the dark blue-gray linen of isolation. This was systematic, deliberate destruction of whatever hope she might have carried into this union. Lady Marin's voice echoed in her mind. The Alpha's mother stood now in the doorway behind Kyle, her sharp ice-blue eyes glittering with satisfaction at this spectacle of rejection. She had orchestrated this, Ilara realized. She had ensured that her son's bride would be humiliated so completely that no one would ever question his devotion to Seraphine. "Do you understand?" Kyle asked, and there was no softness there now, just flat command, just the voice of a man addressing a servant, not a wife. His gray-blue eyes finally met hers, and what she saw there was worse than anger. It was complete, total indifference. She was beneath his notice. She was not even worthy of his contempt. Ilara's fingers trembled as she clutched her cloak tighter. The small silver crescent moon pendant at her throat suddenly felt like it was choking her. "Yes, Alpha," she whispered. What else could she say? She was powerless. Everyone knew it. The pack knew it. He knew it. Good. He turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. For just a moment, something haunted passed across his face, something almost like pain. But then his expression hardened again, and he was gone, leaving her alone in the cold darkness of the servant's wing. Behind him, she heard Lady Marin's voice, a soft, satisfied laugh that echoed down the stone corridor like the sound of victory. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. Ilara stood in that tiny room for a long time, not moving, barely breathing. The weight of humiliation pressed down on her so heavily that she thought she might sink through the stone floor. She dreaded the wedding night for weeks, dreaded the intimacy, the invasion, the loss of what little remained of her autonomy. And yet, somehow, this rejection hurt more than any forced consummation could have. She sank onto the narrow bed and finally finally let herself cry. Silent tears traced lines down her pale cheeks as she stared at the opposite wall, understanding with absolute clarity that she was utterly, completely alone. If this story of betrayal and slow transformation is pulling at your heart, if you're wondering whether a coldly discarded bride can ever truly matter to a stubborn alpha, subscribe to Crimson Moon Diaries for more tales of supernatural love, of wolves and strength, and of the women who refuse to break under the weight of the world's cruelty. The weeks that followed were a slow descent into a different kind of hell. Alara rose each morning before dawn and moved through Iron Vein Keep like a ghost, unseen, unheard, ignored by everyone, except those who existed at the lowest levels of the pack hierarchy. The servants, the kitchen workers, the stable hands, these became her world, the only place where she could exist without causing offense through her mere presence. The cook, a rotund woman named Helga, with flour perpetually in her gray hair and kindness radiating from her warm brown eyes, was the first to show her genuine compassion. On the morning after her wedding, Alara had crept into the kitchens, seeking hot water for washing, her eyes swollen from a night of silent weeping. Helga took one look at her and made a sound that was half pity and half anger. Without saying a word, she pressed a steaming bowl of thick stew into Alara's trembling hands, chunks of root vegetables, tender meat, and broth that smelled of herbs and home. "Eat, girl," Helga commanded, her voice like gravel mixed with honey. "You're skin and bones already. The alpha's new bride or not, you need to eat to survive. A person can't live on pride alone, no matter how much they want to." That simple act of recognition, being seen, being acknowledged as someone worthy of feeding, had broken Alara in a different way. She'd wept again, there in the warm kitchens that smelled of bread and herbs and the rich comfort of home cooking. Helga had patted her awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with emotion, but she never turned away. Every morning after that, Alara would find an extra portion waiting for her, sometimes hidden in a cloth on the kitchen's edge, sometimes pressed into her hands with a whispered word. Helga began teaching her the secrets of the kitchen as they worked side by side, grinding spices and kneading bread. "The alpha's a fool," Helga would mutter as they worked. "Any man who has you and doesn't see it deserves the misery he's bringing on himself. Mark my words, girl. A woman like you, with the light in your eyes and the strength in your heart, she doesn't stay broken forever. She just waits for the moment to become something else." They would share meals together, simple food, but made with such care that it felt like love in edible form. Through these quiet moments, Helga shared stories of the pack's history, of the alpha wars that had shaped Iron Vein, of the legends of rare creatures that sometimes appeared in bloodlines. "There's power in you, child," Helga would say, studying Alara's face as they sat by the kitchen fire late at night. "I can feel it, like a storm waiting to break." The healer, an ancient woman called Miriam with cloudy blue eyes and hands that shook with age, also took Alara under her weathered wing. Miriam lived in a small room attached to the infirmary, surrounded by dried herbs and leather journals filled with remedies and knowledge accumulated over decades. She recognized in Alara something that others did not, a quiet observation, an intelligence, an awareness of things that most missed. "You have a strong spirit," Miriam had said one afternoon as Alara helped her sort through bundles of sage and yarrow. "I can feel it in you. Like a wolf waiting to wake, most would have shattered by now. You're stronger than you know, girl. But strength alone isn't enough. You need to understand what you are, what you're capable of. There are women in the histories who rose from nothing to become legends. You might be one of them. Miriam began teaching Alara about healing herbs, about the physical science of medicine, about the spiritual properties of certain plants. She shared her ancient journals, pointing out passages about rare bloodlines and the signs that indicate hidden power. Watch for changes in yourself, Miriam would say. Changes in your senses, in your perception. Sometimes the body knows things before the mind does. The stable master, a weathered man named Gareth, who moved with the easy confidence of someone who understood animals better than people, was less openly kind, but more genuinely respectful. He'd found her one morning, standing near the horses, Iron Veins prized gray stallions, beautiful and fierce creatures that seemed to sense her loneliness. He'd simply nodded at her, asked if she wanted to help groom them, and never questioned why the alpha's wife was working like a common servant. That one there, the light gray, he's got spirit, Gareth had said, nodding toward a particularly spirited stallion with intelligent eyes. Refuses to be broken. The alpha wanted him trained for war, but the horse has other ideas. Some creatures, you have to earn their loyalty. You can't command it. You have to show them respect first. You have to prove you're worthy of their trust. He taught her how to care for the horses, how to read their moods and needs, how to approach them with quiet confidence. Over weeks of working together, Gareth began sharing stories about the territories, about trade routes and pack movements. You're observant, he'd say to her. You notice things. That's a gift. Use it. There was something in his tone that suggested he meant far more than just noticing horse behavior. While she worked in the shadows, the pack's true machinery operated around her. She began to see things that the nobles and warriors missed, the ways that supplies were being misallocated, creating unnecessary shortages, the routes that the rivals from the eastern territories were using for their spy work, the patterns in their movements that suggested upcoming attacks, the weakness in the northern perimeter that the War Council hadn't yet identified, the corruption in the lower ranks where certain warriors were accepting bribes in exchange for intelligence. She watched, she listened, she pieced together the hidden machinery of the pack's politics and power structures. And every night, in that small room in the servants' wing, she wrote it all down in her weathered, leather-bound journal. The journal had been her father's. He'd given it to her in his final days, his hand trembling as he pressed it into hers. Write down what you see, he'd told her, his voice barely above a whisper, blood already claiming the corners of his mouth. Write down the truth. Write down the names, the patterns, the secrets that people think are hidden. Whether you survive this or not, the truth matters. A woman with knowledge is more dangerous than a woman with a sword. Never forget that. So she wrote, page after page, character sketches of the various lords and their alliances, observations about pack movements and territorial disputes, strategic notes about supply lines and trade routes, details about which warriors were skilled and which were overconfident, which ones had secret allegiances to other packs, which ones would turn traitor if offered enough gold. She filled those pages with her mind, the only part of herself that no one could take from her. The journal became her companion, her confidant, the one place where her voice mattered absolutely. At night, she would sometimes hear sounds from the upper levels of the keep: laughter, music, the sounds of the hall where Seraphine sat in the Luna's chair, the chair that should have been empty, waiting for its true queen. Seraphine had wasted no time in claiming what she thought was hers. She wore the finest dresses, the most precious jewels. She sat beside Kyle at meals, her hand occasionally brushing his arm in a gesture so presumptuous it made Ilara's blood boil. And Kale allowed it. He seemed not to even notice. Or at least, that's what Ilara told herself on the particularly bitter nights when she couldn't sleep. Lady Marin had made it clear that she was pleased with this arrangement. The Alpha's mother had visited the servants' wing once, her carved wooden cane clicking against the stone floor as she looked around Ilara's small room with an expression of satisfaction. "This is appropriate," Lady Marin had said, her sharp, ice-blue eyes glittering with contempt. "A bride from a dying pack has no place in the Iron Vein halls. You should be grateful for these accommodations. Your pack would never have survived without this arrangement. You owe everything to my son's mercy. Remember that when you lie awake at night, you exist only because we allow it." "Yes, my lady," Ilara had replied quietly, her emerald eyes fixed on the stone floor. But inside, something cold and sharp had crystallized. She was beginning to understand that her survival depended on being useful. She was beginning to understand that the only way to matter was to become indispensable. Then, about 3 weeks into her isolation, something changed. Kyle started having nightmares. At first, the servants whispered about it in the kitchens. The Alpha was waking at night screaming. His sheets were soaked with sweat. He was calling out a name, a woman's name, over and over. The other warriors heard him through the walls of his chamber. One night, a younger pack member had rushed to his room thinking he was under attack, only to find Kale thrashing in his bed, his gray-blue eyes unseeing, his wolf form half-shifted and struggling against his human mind. "Ilara," he'd screamed that night, his voice so raw and desperate that even from the servants' wing, 3 levels below, Ilara heard it echo through the keep. "Ilara, no, Ilara, come back. I'm sorry. Come back to me." She'd sat bolt upright in her narrow bed, her heart pounding. That was her name in his mouth, twisted with such agony that she couldn't breathe. The sound of his anguish struck something deep within her, some connection that the bond had created, whether they wanted it or not. The nightmares intensified. Every single night, the Alpha's anguish echoed through Iron Vein Keep like the howling of a wounded animal. His screams would wake the entire warrior barracks. Warriors would hear him through 3 levels of stone, through tapestries and heavy wooden doors, his voice cutting through every barrier like knives. Sometimes he would call her name. Sometimes he would scream about fire consuming her, about enemy claws tearing her apart, about her lying dead in snow while he stood powerless to save her. The dreams were visceral and violent and clearly torturing him from the inside out. Mora, the healer, was called to his chambers repeatedly. She came back looking grim and old, her weathered face even more deeply lined with concern. "Bond sickness," Mora explained quietly when Ilara asked her directly, one of the few people who dared to speak the truth. "The bond between alpha and mate doesn't work if it's denied. It's not a simple thing, you see. The bond goes both directions. It's a connection written into the very soul. When an alpha rejects his true mate, Mora shook her head sadly. It's like trying to tear out a piece of a wolf's heart while leaving the wolf alive. The pain is extraordinary. The wolf inside him knows what he's done. The wolf knows he's rejected the one person who could complete him. So the wolf fights back, claws at the inside of his skin, screams in agony every time he tries to sleep. I've watched this before. I know how it ends if he doesn't accept it. Does it? Ilara's voice was barely a whisper. Does it kill him? Sometimes, Mora said. If he doesn't accept it, if he keeps fighting it, it eats him from the inside out. The wolf goes mad, literally mad, consumed by a pain it can't express. The man weakens, his body begins to break down. Eventually, she trailed off, but the implication was clear. He would die, torn apart from the inside by a bond he wouldn't accept. Ilara wasn't sure how she felt about that. Part of her, the angry, betrayed part that had been growing stronger with each passing day, thought it only fair. He had discarded her. He had chosen public humiliation as her portion. He had looked her in the eye and called her a transaction, a tool, nothing. Why should she care if his own cruelty destroyed him? Why should his pain matter to her when he had shown her so completely that she didn't matter to him? But another part of her, the deeper part that Mora had recognized, the part that was slowly waking like a wolf coming out of hibernation, couldn't bear the thought of that agony. She found herself listening for his screams at night. She found herself imagining him in his luxurious chambers, thrashing in expensive sheets, utterly broken by a pain he couldn't name. The worst part was knowing that she could ease that pain if she chose to. The bond between them was real, written into their very souls. If she went to him, if she accepted him, the agony might stop. But to do that would be to surrender. To do that would be to forgive the humiliation without receiving any actual change in how he treated her. The pack began to notice their alpha's decline. Kyle started missing meals. He lost weight, muscle definition beginning to vanish from that broad frame. His gray-blue eyes, which had always been fierce and commanding, began to look haunted. In war council meetings, his strategic thinking grew scattered. He would start to make a decision about territorial defense or trade negotiations, then stop mid-sentence, his mind clearly elsewhere. His hands would shake as he held the documents. Sweat would bead on his forehead, even in the cold stone chambers. The alpha is weakening, she heard the head warrior, a grizzled man named Torvin, say to another pack member in the courtyard. If word of this gets out to the Eastern Territories, they'll strike. We need him whole. We need him strong. Seraphine says it's just temporary stress, another voice replied. She says once his wolf adjusts to the new Luna configuration, he'll be fine. But everyone knew that wasn't true. Everyone could see that Kyle Ironvein was slowly dying from the inside out. The pack's stability was beginning to crumble with his weakness. It was during these dark weeks that something extraordinary happened. Ilara was working in the infirmary with Miriam, grinding herbs with a stone mortar, when she felt it, a tingling in her skin, a burning deep in her chest, a presence rising up from somewhere beneath her breastbone, something wild and angry and ancient, something that had been waiting her entire life to emerge. She dropped the mortar. What is it? Miriam asked, looking up sharply. I don't know. I feel... Ilara couldn't finish the sentence. The feeling was growing, expanding, filling every cell of her body with a presence that felt larger than herself. Something was waking up, something inside her that had been dormant her entire life, perhaps deliberately suppressed by the trauma of her youth and the weight of family expectation. Miriam's cloudy blue eyes widened. She set down her work and moved to Ilara, placing one gnarled hand against Ilara's chest. The old woman's breath caught. Her hand trembled. "Oh, child," she whispered. "Oh, my dear child. It's a wolf. Your wolf. It's waking." Ilara looked down at her pale, ink-stained fingers. Her raven black hair suddenly felt unfamiliar against her shoulders. Something was moving under her skin, like a creature attempting to break free. "That's impossible. I've never been able to shift. I was always the weak one in my pack. Everyone said I was human cursed, that the wolf bloodline skipped me entirely. Everyone said." "Everyone was wrong," Miriam interrupted. Her voice was certain, carrying the weight of knowledge earned over decades. "Ilara, listen to me. There are wolves that take longer to awaken. Wolves whose power is so significant that their human forms sometimes suppress them, keep them dormant until the time is right. The trauma of being human shamed can create blocks that keep a powerful wolf hidden. Sometimes a white wolf, a rare, ancient creature, will wait inside a human form until the moment of greatest need, until the circumstances are exactly right for her emergence. I think." Miriam's hands trembled slightly as she gripped Ilara's shoulders. "I think you have a white wolf. I think you've always had one. And I think she's been waiting for you to be strong enough to survive becoming her." "What? No. White wolves are legend. They're rare, powerful, a sign of the old bloodlines," Miriam finished. "A white wolf appears once in a generation, sometimes less frequently than that. I've seen it once before, 50 years ago. A female with white fur and golden eyes. She was extraordinary. She was powerful enough to reshape territories, to unite packs that had been at war. And she was almost destroyed because no one believed she was real. Everyone around her thought she was human cursed, thought she was weak. By the time she finally shifted, she lost years that could have been spent learning to control her power. Don't let that be your fate, Ilara. Don't let them suppress you. Don't let their disbelief become your truth. A white wolf belongs to no pack but her own. She answers to no alpha, but the one she chooses to respect. You might be far more powerful than the man who discarded you ever dreamed." Over the following days, with Miriam's careful guidance, Ilara began the process of accepting her wolf. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She would lie in her small room at night, eyes closed, and feel the presence of her wolf just beneath the surface of her skin. The sensation was like standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into an abyss that might be filled with water or stone. She could feel her claws growing beneath her fingernails. She could feel her senses expanding, becoming sharper, more aware of every scent and sound around her. She could feel her strength building, coiling inside her muscles like a serpent preparing to strike. And then, one night, as the moon reached its fullness and hung heavy in the snowy sky above Iron Vein Keep, she shifted for the first time. It was the most extraordinary pain and pleasure she'd ever experienced. Her bones reshaped themselves, cracking and reforming. Her skin burst and reformed with pure white fur, like moonlight given substance. Her human consciousness expanded to encompass something vast and powerful, and so magnificently alive that she nearly wept. And there, in that moment, as she looked down at her new form, she saw them. Her paws were pure white against the dark stone of the courtyard. Her fur was like moonlight given physical substance. Her eyes glowed with golden amber light that illuminated the darkness around her. She was magnificent. She was powerful. She was exactly who she was meant to be. The white wolf stood in the courtyard of Iron Vein Keep, fully manifested, and every wolf within a mile radius felt her presence and understood. Something ancient and rare had awakened. The white wolf ran through the snowy territories that night, reveling in strength she'd never known, in the beauty of a form that matched her soul. She ran and ran, her paws flying across snow and frozen earth, the wind carrying her scent across territories. A white wolf, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. She ran until her muscles burned with exertion and her heart sang with a joy that had been forbidden to her for so long. She howled at the moon, a sound so pure and beautiful that it made the wolves of Iron Vein pause mid-breath. That was no ordinary howl. That was the cry of something rare and powerful and ancient. By morning, when she shifted back and stumbled back into the keep, bruised and exhausted and profoundly changed, the entire pack knew. Word spread like wildfire through the halls of Iron Vein Keep. The Alpha's bride had a white wolf. The weak, discarded girl from the Crescent Pack was a rare and powerful creature. The pack elders came to the healer's room where Miriam was nursing her through the exhaustion that came with her first full shift. They bowed to her, actually bowed, their faces filled with something that looked like awe and something that looked like regret for how they treated her. Torvin, the head warrior, knelt before her with his forehead to the ground. Lady Marin's ice-blue eyes went wide with shock, then flickered with something that might have been fear. "We didn't know," one of the elders, a silver-furred warrior named Aldrich, said quietly. "If we had known your true nature, we would never have." Ilara felt something twist in her chest. Whatever she felt toward Kyle Ironvein, whether it was anger or hurt or the first fragile shoots of something more complicated, she didn't want him dead. She certainly didn't want him dead because of her. Then came the night that changed everything. The Eastern Territories attacked. It wasn't a major assault, but it was targeted and deliberate. They struck at the northern perimeter, the weakest point in Iron Vein's defenses, the very weakness that Ilara had documented in her journal weeks ago. The attack was coordinated perfectly, striking precisely at the points of weakness she'd identified. Alarms rang out across the keep. Warriors mobilized. Kale, despite his weakness, attempted to rise from his bed to command the response, but the bond sickness had weakened him too much. He struggled to even stand. He collapsed during the war council. One moment, he was standing at the head of the war table, his scarred eyebrow furrowed in concentration, his hands flat on the ancient wood, trying desperately to focus through the pain that was consuming him. The next moment, his legs simply gave out. His body hit the stone floor with a sickening crack. The war council erupted in chaos. Warriors shouted. Someone called for the healer. Seraphine screamed his name with theatrical precision, rushing to his side with crocodile tears and dramatic gestures. The northern perimeter was collapsing. The enemy was moving deeper into Iron Vein territory, and the Alpha was unconscious on the stone floor, unable to command, unable to lead, useless. And in that moment of absolute crisis, when the pack was leaderless and the enemy was at the gates and everything Kale had built was about to collapse, Elara acted. She walked into the war room, her white furred cloak draped around her shoulders, her emerald eyes blazing with a clarity that came from weeks of observation and study. Behind her came Miriam and several of the pack elders. The northern perimeter is weak because the watch posts aren't positioned correctly, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. I can see it on the maps. Here, here, and here. Look at the spacing. The Eastern Territories found those gaps because someone didn't do their job properly, or because they were paid to make those gaps. But I have a counter strategy that will work. If we move the reserve warriors to the eastern approach, the one that curves around through the frozen ridge, we can flank them before they expect it. It will take 3 hours, but they won't anticipate it because their spies told them we only have warriors on the western flank. And if we send a secondary force through the lower passages beneath the keep, the ones that come out north of their current position, we can cut off their escape route completely. They came expecting a weakened Alpha and a confused war council. They came expecting to find us disorganized and panicked. Instead, we're going to show them exactly why the Iron Vein name is feared across all the territories. We're going to teach them that attacking us costs more than any prize is worth. I can draw them the specific routes, show them the timing, explain the strategy in detail, but we have to decide right now. Torvin, the head warrior, looked at her with something that might have been skepticism or might have been hope, but he was desperate. Kale was unconscious on the stone floor. Seraphine was useless. The pack needed someone, anyone with a plan. Do it, Torvin commanded. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Iron Vein Keep, Elara's voice mattered. Elara's mind mattered. Elara herself mattered in a way that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. The battle lasted 3 hours. By the time it was over, the Eastern Territories had been soundly defeated, their forces routed, their escape route cut off by the flanking maneuver that Elara had suggested with such precision. The pack had suffered minimal losses, only 3 warriors killed, a handful more wounded. And more importantly, word had spread throughout Iron Vein Keep. The Alpha's bride, the discarded girl from the Crescent Pack, had saved them. The White Wolf had saved them. The woman they treated as nothing had proven to be everything. When the chaos settled and the wounded were being tended and the survivors were celebrating in the Great Hall, Kyle finally woke. Miriam was the one who found him in his chamber, his fever broken, his body exhausted but healing. He looked up at her with those gray-blue eyes, and something in his expression had shifted. The haunted look was still there, but beneath it was something that looked almost like clarity, awareness, understanding. Elara, he said, his voice hoarse from days of screaming her name in his nightmares. Where is she? Is she hurt? Is she alive? She's resting, Miriam said carefully. She's exhausted. She saved the pack tonight. She defeated the Eastern assault with strategy and brilliance. She was magnificent. Kyle closed his eyes, his hands clenched into fists. I have to see her. I have to. First, Miriam interrupted, her ancient voice carrying an authority that even an alpha had to respect. You have to understand what you've done to her. You rejected your true mate, your Luna, your other half. You cast her into darkness and humiliation, and she saved you anyway. She saved your pack. She saved your life. And now you have to be prepared to accept that she might not forgive you. You have to understand that you have no right to demand forgiveness, no right to expect that your recognition of her value will erase the months of cruelty. Kyle opened his eyes again, and there was such raw pain in them that even Miriam, who had seen much in her long life, felt something break in her chest. "I know," he whispered. "I know what I've done. I've felt it every moment. The bond won't let me forget. It won't let me rest." When night fell, Kyle made his way down to the servants' wing. It was the first time since their wedding night that he'd walked this path. His hand trembled as he raised it to knock on that small, unremarkable wooden door. The wood felt cold beneath his fingers. He could hear movement inside, footsteps, the sound of water being poured. Ilara opened it, wearing a simple sleeping shift, her raven black hair loose around her shoulders, her emerald eyes wide with surprise and wariness. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stared at each other across the threshold, years of pain and rejection, and unmet longing hanging between them like a physical thing. She was beautiful, more beautiful than he'd allowed himself to see before, now that she stood before him, radiating the quiet power of someone who had survived and transformed through that survival. "I read your journals," Kyle said finally, his voice cracked with emotion. "I went to my chambers to write orders for the grateful commendations I owe you, and I found myself in your room instead. I don't know how. It was like my feet carried me there of their own accord. And when I found your journals, Ilara, I read every page. I read about your observations of the pack, your strategic notes, your character assessments. You understood my lands better than I did. You understood my people better than I did. And I treated you like nothing. I cast you into darkness while you were saving me, saving us all from the shadows. Weeks of careful documentation, weeks of observation that showed me exactly which territories would attack, exactly where our weaknesses were. You knew. You've known all along. And you could have let me fail. You could have let the bond sickness kill me. But you didn't. You saved me. You saved all of us." Ilara said nothing. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable, but her hand tightened slightly on the door frame. "Come back," Kyle said, and his voice cracked with emotion. "Come back to the Luna's chambers. Come back to my table. Come back to me. Please, I'm begging you. Not because I've suddenly decided you're useful. Not because I need you to complete the bond, but because you deserve to be acknowledged as what you truly are. A brilliant, strong, magnificent woman who saved this pack with her mind and her courage. Come back, and I swear, by everything I am, I will spend the rest of my life proving that you matter to me." Ilara's fingers tightened on the edge of the door. "You told me to sleep here, Alpha," she said, and her voice was soft but implacable. "You told me I was a transaction. You told me I wasn't a wife. You told me I was nothing. You did that deliberately. You humiliated me in front of your entire pack. You cast me aside while your mother laughed. You let me believe that my own mate thought I was worthless. So I slept here, and I became something. I became someone valuable on my own terms, not because you suddenly decided I was worthy. I became the woman who saved your pack, not because you commanded it, but because I chose to. And now you want me to come back to you? Not because you love me, not because you respect me, but because you finally understand my usefulness? That's exactly what it is," Ilara interrupted. And there was a steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. I was willing to be your wife, Alpha. I came to you as a bride, broken and terrified, hoping that somehow we could build something together. You rejected me. You discarded me. And yes, that hurt. But it also freed me. It gave me the space to discover who I really am. I have a white wolf, Kale. Do you understand what that means? I have power that rivals yours. I have a mind that surpasses your war council's strategic abilities. I have value that has nothing to do with any bond between us. I don't need you. The pack needed you to be a functional alpha, and I provided the strategy to make that happen. But I didn't do it for you. I did it for myself. I did it because I needed to prove that I could. Kale stood there in the doorway, looking at her with an expression that was equal parts love and anguish. And then what do I do? He asked quietly. How do I earn your forgiveness? How do I earn the right to call you wife? Alara was quiet for a long moment. She studied him, looking past the alpha exterior to the wounded man beneath. You start by understanding that I'm not the same frightened girl you married. You start by respecting that I've built my own strength in your absence. You stop expecting me to be grateful for scraps of attention. You treat me as an equal, not as a subordinate who should be honored to receive your notice. And then maybe, if you're willing to truly see me, not the transaction, not the tool, but me, we can talk about what comes next. But understand this, I'm no longer willing to accept less. I'm no longer willing to pretend. You want me back? Then you have to earn it, truly earn it, with actions that prove your sincerity every single day. Not words, actions. Over the following weeks, Kyle worked to earn his bride's respect. He commissioned her officially as a member of his war council, giving her a seat at the strategy table equal to Torvin's own. He asked her opinion on strategic matters and actually listened to her answers rather than dismissing them. He made public statements about the value she'd brought to Iron Vein, ensuring that the pack understood she was not a weakness, but a tremendous strength. He stood before the gathered pack and acknowledged his mistake, his treatment of her, his cruelty. It was a humbling moment for an alpha, an admission of weakness that shattered the mythology of invincibility. But he didn't push for intimacy. He didn't demand his rights as her mate. He simply showed up day after day with actions that proved his sincerity. He brought her books from the keep's library, knowing she loved to read and write. He introduced her to the other noble families as his respected strategic advisor. He even, in a moment of quiet vulnerability, shared his own struggles with bond sickness, explaining how it had nearly destroyed him and how her strength had actually saved him from that destruction. He spoke to the pack about the terror of feeling the bond denied, about how the wolf inside him had nearly consumed his human mind, about how he'd finally understood that rejecting her had been rejecting a fundamental part of himself. Lady Marin was forced to acknowledge her. The Alpha's mother came to the War Council one afternoon and saw Ilara presenting a territorial proposal that Kal was now considering implementing. For a moment, her sharp ice blue eyes flickered with something that might have been regret. She didn't apologize. Lady Marin was too proud for that, but she nodded slightly in Ilara's direction with something that was almost respect. You have your father's strategic mind, she said quietly to Ilara after one council meeting. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't love, but it was acknowledgement. Seraphine, of course, was cast aside. Without Kale's attention, Without the position of power she thought would be hers, she became a liability. She was quietly sent to another territory to be fostered with a different pack. Her emerald green velvet dresses and gold rings no longer welcome in Iron Vein Keep. Some said Kale showed her mercy in not casting her out entirely. Others whispered that Seraphine got exactly what she deserved. And then, months into this careful process of rebuilding trust, Kale did something that surprised everyone. He formally presented Alara to the pack as Luna, not as a bride forced into position, not as the discarded wife of a rejected treaty, but as a true Luna, powerful, wise, strategic, and in her own right, a force to be reckoned with. The ceremony happened on the night of the winter solstice, when the darkness was deepest and the stars burned brightest. Alara wore a gown of white silk that matched her wolf form, her raven black hair bound with silver thread and small white gems that caught the light like stars. Kyle wore black leather and dark blue velvet, his stormy gray-blue eyes fixed on her with such intensity that the entire pack could see what they meant to each other. When he took her hand, not as a command, but as a question, asking if she would do this, if she would step into her power, she said yes, not with the defeat of someone accepting an unavoidable fate, not with the hope of someone desperate to be loved, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her own strength and was choosing, on her terms, to share her life with this man. Yes, she said, and the word carried the weight of a decision fully made, a choice freely given. Before the pack and before the gods, I present to you Alara of the White Wolf, your Luna, Kyle announced, his voice ringing through the great hall with absolute conviction. She is our future. She is our strength. She is the heart of Iron Vein. And she is the woman I love, not because of what she can do for us, but because of who she is, because of her brilliance, her courage, her refusal to break under impossible circumstances. Alara, I ask your forgiveness, not because I expect it, but because I understand the magnitude of what I've done to you. And I spend the rest of my life trying to prove myself worthy of standing beside you. When they completed the formal bonding, a ceremony that allowed them to finally accept the connection that had been torturing them both for months. It was not the violent, desperate connection that the unhealed bond might have created. It was something deeper and truer. It was a connection built on respect, on earned trust, on the knowledge that they had both survived something that could have destroyed them. The bond sang between them, a harmony that the pack could feel, that resonated through every wolf in Iron Vein territory. That night, when Alara and Kyle finally consummated their marriage in the Luna's chambers that Alara had chosen to occupy, but not because she had been ordered there. It was with a tenderness and an intensity that surprised them both. His hands trembled, not with dominance, but with reverence, as he touched her. Her voice, when she spoke his name, carried not desperation, but choice. They moved together as equals, as partners, as two people who had fought their way to this moment through pain and separation and hard-won understanding. As the months passed and seasons changed, Iron Vein Keep became a place of unexpected peace. Alara stepped fully into her role as Luna, her strategic brilliance complementing Kale's warrior strength. Together, they reformed the pack's defense systems, improved trade relations with neighboring territories, and created a culture where intelligence and loyalty were valued equally with raw power. The Crescent Pack Ilara's original family was brought into the Iron Vein fold with honor, their decline reversed through the alliance that Ilara had secured through her own transformation. The white wolf and the dark wolf became a symbol of balance in the territories. Stories began to spread about the Alpha's bride who was cast into darkness and emerged stronger for it, about the lonely girl who found her own power in the servant's wing, about the woman who was willing to walk away from a man until he learned to truly see her. Traders carried these stories across territories. Young women looked to her as proof that rejection could be transformation, that being discarded could become the greatest gift. And here are the truths that this story carries for you. First, your value is not determined by someone else's recognition. Ilara was worthy even when Kyle treated her as nothing. Second, sometimes the greatest strength comes from rejection, from being forced to discover yourself apart from someone else's approval. Third, love, true love, requires respect. It requires seeing the whole person, not just what you can use them for. Fourth, you have power that you might not even know about yet. Your white wolf is waiting inside you. Fifth, it's never too late to earn someone's forgiveness if you truly change. Sixth, isolation can be transformation if you choose to see it that way. Seventh, strategic intelligence and quiet observation are weapons that rival brute force. Eighth, sometimes the person you are meant to marry has to learn how to truly deserve you. Ninth, your dignity is not negotiable, even for love. And 10th, when someone finally shows you that you matter, you'll know the difference between someone who respects you and someone who only wants to possess you. 11th, solitude can be the greatest gift if you fill it with growth instead of despair. And finally, the most powerful thing a woman can do is become undeniable. If this story of transformation and earned love has resonated with you, if you found yourself cheering for Ilara as she built her own strength, please subscribe to Crimson Moon Diaries for more tales of werewolf romance, of women who refuse to be broken, and of alpha males who learn that true strength is recognizing the strength in your mate. Share this story. Leave a comment telling us who you think was more powerful, Ilara in her human form or Ilara in her white wolf form. And most importantly, remember, you are never nothing. Even when the world treats you like a transaction, you are worthy of respect, of love, and of the freedom to build your own strength. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the pack.